Most men spend their entire lives running from death. Witold Pilecki walked straight into its arms. September 1940, Warsaw. The city breathes in whispers, boots echo on cobblestone, windows stay shut, curtains barely move, people disappear at night, and by morning no one asks questions anymore. While thousands are hiding in basements, clinging to silence like it's the last form of resistance, one man steps into the open. He adjusts his coat. His heartbeat is steady, not because he isn't afraid, but because he has already made peace with fear. A Nazi SS patrol moves down the street. Men scatter, eyes drop. No one wants to be seen, except him. He walks toward them, not quickly, not hesitantly, calm, intentional. He isn't caught by mistake. He isn't dragged, beaten, or hunted. He chooses this. Within minutes, he is shoved into a truck filled with terrified strangers. The doors slam shut. Darkness swallows them. And just like that, Witold Pilecki disappears from the world. But what no one inside that truck knows is that one of them just volunteered for hell. The destination has a name that at the time meant almost nothing: Auschwitz. A place whispered about in fragments, a labor camp, they said, a prison, a rumor. But Pilecki already suspected the truth, and he had a mission so dangerous, so irrational, that no military doctrine would ever approve it. Infiltrate the camp, gather intelligence, build resistance, and if possible, destroy it from within. The train arrives like a verdict. Metal doors open, light cuts through the darkness, screaming, dogs barking, order shouted in a language of violence. Men are forced out, beaten into lines, stripped of identity before they even understand where they are. Names are taken, clothes are taken, hair is shaved, and then something even more important is taken: humanity. Pilecki becomes a number. This is where most stories end, but his is just beginning. Imagine the psychological architecture of a place like Auschwitz. It isn't just built with barbed wire and watchtowers. It's engineered to dismantle the human mind. Sleep deprivation, starvation, random violence, public executions. Every system is designed with one goal: break the individual. Because a broken individual doesn't resist, a broken individual obeys, and a mass of broken individuals becomes silence. But Pilecki sees something the guards don't: a flaw. The Ansis believe they're dealing with animals, numbers, disposable bodies, and that arrogance blinds them, because they stop looking closely. They stop seeing individuals. They stop imagining resistance. This is where Pilecki begins to operate. He becomes invisible, not by hiding, but by blending perfectly into the suffering. He doesn't stand out. He doesn't act heroic. He doesn't reveal intelligence. He becomes the ideal prisoner, weak enough to ignore, obedient enough to overlook, alive enough to act. This is the first principle: total dissimulation. If the enemy cannot see you, they cannot stop you. Weeks turn into months. Hunger becomes constant. Cold becomes identity. Death becomes routine. Bodies pile up faster than thoughts can process them. And yet, something impossible begins to form: connections, whispers, trust. Pilecki starts identifying men who still have something left inside them. Not strength, not hope, but purpose. Because in a place designed to erase meaning, purpose is the most dangerous weapon of all. Christmas 1940. The Nazis stage a grotesque illusion of humanity.
A tree stands in the courtyard, lights flicker, and beneath it, the bodies of prisoners who died that day, displayed as gifts, a message. This is your worth. Most men would break. Pilecki recruits because meaning is stronger than terror. He forms the ZOW, a secret underground resistance network inside Auschwitz. The structure is surgical, cells of 5. No one knows more than a handful of others. If one is captured, the system survives. If one breaks, the mission continues. They steal food, they redistribute it, because hunger divides, but shared survival unites. They smuggle medicine, they map routines, they prepare. Always prepare. And then they do something impossible. They build a radio transmitter inside Auschwitz, piece by piece, hidden, protected, and suddenly the outside world begins to hear. Reports, descriptions, warnings, the first signals of industrialized death. Pilecki documents everything: gas chambers, executions, the scale, the system, the truth. His reports reach the resistance, then London, then the Allies, and the response? Silence, doubt, disbelief, because what he describes is too horrific to accept. Imagine carrying that weight. You see thousands dying every day. You risk everything to tell the truth, and the world looks away. Most people would collapse here, but Pilecki doesn't, because his mission was never about recognition, it was about responsibility. And this leads to the third principle: radical optimism. Not hope as a feeling, but hope as a decision, a strategy, a weapon. Years pass, 945 days inside Auschwitz, 945 days of resistance, of survival, of refusing to become what the system wants. And then he makes a decision. The camp cannot be destroyed from within. The world will not act, so he will force it to see. April 1943, night, no moon. He moves.
The door finally gives way, and in that instant, everything changes. Pilecki and the 2 men with him don't hesitate. They move fast, but not blindly. Every step is calculated, every movement based on months of observation inside the camp. They know the routines, the weak points, the small gaps in a system that was designed to be perfect, but wasn't. Behind them, chaos erupts. Gunfire breaks the silence of the night as guards realize what's happening. Searchlights tear through the darkness, sweeping across the ground like predators hunting their prey. Bullets cut through the air, close enough to remind them that one mistake, 1 second of hesitation, will end everything. But they keep running. Because in that moment, there are only 2 outcomes: movement or death. Their lungs burn, their bodies are exhausted, but stopping is not an option. And then, slowly, something unexpected happens. The noise begins to fade. The shouting grows distant. The lights no longer reach them. They made it. Against all odds, Witold Pilecki escapes Auschwitz alive. But for him, survival was never the objective. It was only the next phase of the mission. The moment he regains his freedom, he returns to the resistance. He begins writing again, documenting everything he witnessed, every detail of the system, every atrocity that the world still struggles to fully comprehend. His reports are sent out once more, reaching the same channels, the same decision-makers, and once again he pushes for action. He calls for intervention, for a direct strike, for something, anything that could disrupt what is happening inside the camp. But the response remains the same: slow,
distant, uncertain. The world is still hesitating, and while it hesitates, people continue to die. Eventually, the war comes to an end. Nazi Germany collapses, and the camps are finally liberated. The truth, which once seemed too horrifying to believe, is now undeniable. Photographs emerge, survivors speak, mass graves are uncovered. Now the world understands. But for millions, that understanding comes too late. For a brief moment, it feels like justice might finally exist, like the suffering had meaning, like the sacrifices were not in vain. But history doesn't end with victory. It simply changes form. Poland falls under Soviet control, and a new regime takes power. The symbols are different, the ideology is different, but the structure remains familiar. Control, surveillance, suppression. And once again, Pilecki finds himself on the same side of the fight. He continues his work, gathering intelligence, documenting abuses, exposing what others are too afraid to confront. Because for him, oppression is not defined by flags or slogans, it is defined by actions. And that makes him dangerous. Not because he is violent, but because he is persistent, because he refuses to stay silent, even when silence would mean safety. So the system responds the only way it knows. It arrests him. This time, there is no escape plan, no network to rely on, no calculated infiltration. He is taken, interrogated, and subjected to a level of torture designed not just to extract information, but to destroy him completely. What makes this moment even more disturbing is what he later told his wife, that what he experienced under communist imprisonment felt worse than Auschwitz. Not because the physical conditions were necessarily harsher, but because of what it represented. In Auschwitz, the enemy was clear, the brutality was expected. But here, the violence comes from his own country, from a system that claims to represent liberation. It is betrayal in its purest form. In 1948, he is put on trial, although the word trial hardly applies. There is no real defense, no possibility of justice. The outcome has already been decided. He is declared guilty. The sentence is death. Even then, there is no collapse, no visible fear that defines him, not because he doesn't feel it, but because fear no longer dictates his actions. He has faced death before, many times, and each time he chose to act instead of surrender. His execution is carried out with cold efficiency, a single bullet to the back of the head. No ceremony, no recognition, no marked grave. His body is hidden, and his name is erased from public memory. For decades, his story disappears, not because it lacked importance, but because it was inconvenient. A man who resisted not one, but two oppressive systems does not fit easily into controlled narratives. A man who cannot be broken is difficult to explain, and even more difficult to control. And that is precisely why he was feared. Because systems built on fear rely on one fundamental assumption, that eventually everyone will give in. Pilecki never did. Not inside Auschwitz, where every element was designed to destroy his identity. Not under torture, when his body was pushed beyond its limits, and not even in his final moments, when surrender could mean relief. He gave them nothing, no confession that justified their actions, no betrayal of his ideals, no psychological victory. And in doing so, he achieved something extremely rare. He remained free. not physically, but mentally. And that kind of freedom is something no regime can tolerate, because a person who cannot be broken cannot be controlled, and a system that cannot control you will always see you as a threat. At this point, the story stops being only about history. It becomes something more personal. Because the conditions are different, the stakes are different, but the mechanism is the same. Fear still exists. Pressure still exists. Moments where silence feels safer than action still exist. If you were standing on that street in 1940, watching that truck being filled with people taken to an unknown fate, what would you do? Would you step forward, knowing exactly what that decision might cost you? Or would you do what most people do? Look away, justify it, tell yourself that it's not your responsibility. Because fear rarely presents itself as something dramatic. Most of the time, it's quiet. It tells you to wait, to stay safe, to avoid risk. And little by little, that hesitation becomes acceptance. That acceptance becomes normality. And that is how systems like Auschwitz are allowed to exist, not only through force, but through inaction. Pilecki understood something that most people never fully grasp. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else matters more. He walked into the worst place on earth, not because he believed he would survive, but because he believed it was necessary. He built resistance in a place designed to eliminate it, escaped when it became impossible to continue, and then chose to keep fighting even when the enemy changed. Not because he was fearless, but because he refused to be controlled. The files surrounding his execution remained sealed for decades, and when they were finally opened, they revealed something deeply unsettling. Even after everything he endured, there was no moment where he broke, no point where he gave them what they wanted, and that, more than anything else, explains why he was so dangerous. Because in the end, the greatest threat to any system of control is not rebellion. It is a person who simply refuses to submit. So now the question is no longer about Witold Pilecki. It's about you. Where in your life have you chosen silence over action? Where has fear influenced your decisions without you even realizing it? Because history doesn't repeat itself through identical events. It repeats itself through human behavior. And at some point, in some form, everyone is faced with a choice: to step forward or to look away.